to the third episode of Think 2044. I am your host, Macpherson Mukoka, and as usual, I'm not alone. Today, I'm joined by Mr. Aaron Kachunga, who is a water engineer from the Water Resources Management Authority, WAMA. Mr. Kachunga, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much.
Also joining me is Mr. Edson Nkonde, who is acting director at the Meteorological Department. Mr. Nkonde, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much.
On my far right is Mr. Joyce Sinyangwe, who is coming from the Ministry of Agriculture, and he is the Principal Agriculture Specialist, Land Management and Conservation Farming. Mr. Sinyangwe, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much.
We'll take a short break. We'll be right back. Stay tuned.
Climate change is real. Get involved. Start a green conversation today. Think 2044. Call the free hotline 2044 for more information. This advert is brought to you by the Pilot Program for Climate Resilience, PPCR, under the Ministry of National Development Planning with support from the World Bank Group and the Africa Development Bank.
Welcome back. This is the third episode of Think 2044, and today we are discussing climate resilience agricultural practices. Mr. Nkonde, what is climate change so that we get to know exactly what we are dealing with?
Thank you very much. Probably I'll start by defining what climate is. Now, climate is just the average weather conditions. Now, climate change is a shift from those average conditions that we've observed over a period of time. So, and that shift should be over an extended period of time observed. So, meaning, for example, that if, for example, what we observed this year, January, we had most of areas across the country receiving zero rainfall. But from our climate observations, we know that January is the maximum, is the period when we receive maximum rains across the country. So if we start observing that trend where we are having zero rainfall recorded in January, that now is climate change. There's a shift in what we normally observe. So in a nutshell, that's what climate is. It's a shift from what we normally expect.
Are there specific causes of climate change?
There are several causes of climate change. Some are external, like the sun. The sun goes through its own cycles. So those cycles, at some point, it might give us a lot of energy, which might raise the temperature of the earth. At some point, it might reduce that energy emission and subsequently have an effect of reduction in temperature over the earth. But there are internal causes as well. And one that might be of interest is what humans are doing, the activities that humans are doing. For example, agricultural practices can cause an effect on changes in weather patterns. Agricultural activities, deforestation, but most importantly is the way we generate our energy from fossil fuels, because it has an impact on increasing what we call greenhouse gases. Okay. Now, greenhouse gases are the ones that cause, when we emit these greenhouse gases, they form what we call a sort of a blanket over the earth. And that blanket traps energy that we receive from the sun. Because under normal circumstances, what is expected is when we receive this energy from the sun, the earth is supposed to emit it back. But because of what we are emitting, greenhouse gases from our activities, we are forming a blanket which is trapping that energy, and subsequently raising the temperatures. And that rise in temperature on the globe is what is causing shifts in our climate and climate change.
All right, perfect. You've just touched on an interesting aspect, which is the agriculture sector, and it's good that we have Mr. Sinyangwe here. Mr. Sinyangwe, how does climate change affect farmers in Zambia?
Thank you very much for that question. First, let me start by saying that agriculture in Zambia is rainfall dependent. And any shift in climate systems, then automatically that affects our farmers. This will affect our farmers in a number of ways. For example, delayed onset of rains will imply delayed planting on the part of farmers. So that has a ripple effect, meaning that delayed planting, and in an event that you have a shortened rainfall season, you may have an impact on your yield, which will ultimately affect your food security and your nutrition security. And other ways in which farmers are affected include, for example, when drier conditions would favor occurrences of certain pests and diseases. You may recall in the recent past, we experienced drier conditions from the last week of December last season to the end of third week in January 2018.
Okay.
And during that time, we had an outbreak of 4 armyworms. So such shifts in climate systems will favor certain occurrences of certain pests, which affects the farmers.
Thank you so much. And now, Mr. Kachunga, we know that agriculture solely depends on water for anything to go and anything to grow. You are coming from WAMA and a water engineer for that matter. Are there any specific regulations that you have put in place to regulate the use of water to reduce climate change?
From the discussions that are going on, you could see, or rather one could tell that water is a lifeblood of any economy. And so without the water or the adequate water resources in the country, you are finding a situation where you have to face difficulties or other challenges in agriculture, energy. All these, water contributes to the economy, the developmental economy of the country. And so it drives the sectors in construction, healthy energy, and tourism. But
I want to know, are there regulations to regulate the use of water to reduce climate change in the aspect of the agriculture sector?
So under this, the National Water Policy of 2010, there are 3 specific guidelines or regulations that focus on the climate change, on how we're supposed. And one of them is that what we are currently doing right now is, this is a campaign, and WAMA is participating, as you can see, WAMA is here. Mm-hmm. And one of them is also to monitor also the potential impacts of climate change on the ecosystem. And also WAMA has been a part. We're also talking about supplying of clean and safe water to the communities. Currently, WAMA has put in regulations that when you're drilling a borehole, it must be fully cased, it must be tested. And so now the communities are there to benefit safe and clean water from the groundwater. And so these are some of the duties, or some of the regulations that have been put in place by the authority.
Okay. I am tempted to ask you, because there is a debate now concerning the drilling of boreholes, and I read a few weeks ago that from 8,000 kwacha, a bore will now be drilled at about 30,000 kwacha. Don't you think this is also too much on the poor farmer, mostly in the rural area, that will depend on a borehole, much as we want to reduce climate change?
So if you focus back on the cost of the boreholes, it was actually the same price that is being seen to be reflected now. Because in the past, the drillers were not registered, were not monitored. And so they could do anything. If they come to you to ask, to drill a borehole, you could give them any price, because they're not losing anything at that particular time. But now we are encouraging all the drillers to be registered with the authority. Mm-hmm. So that entails that you, as a client who is going to approach those drillers, you are going to receive those services, which are going to be regulated by the authority. Okay. So it is required that all these drilling companies are registered with the authority, and by so doing, the old prices that used to reflect under the Ministry of Water Development by then are still going to be the ones that are going to be reflecting out currently.
Okay. Now, Mr. Nkonde, what are the general future projections of Zambia, say, for the next 30 years in terms of climate change?
Thank you. One obvious one that we are seeing is that there will be an increase in temperature from what we are recording, the average recordings we have now. So that will have obviously impacts on all the sectors, from water resource management to agricultural practices to energy generation, because increase in temperature will mean that, for example, our reservoirs will have, there will be an increase in evaporation, meaning we'll lose a lot of water to evaporation, and therefore less water for agriculture and less water for power generation. But also what we are noting is that we'll have extreme weather conditions. Like I can cite what we experienced in the 2017-2018 season, where in the same season you had two extremes. You had very dry conditions in the first half of the season and very wet conditions in the second half of the season, meaning that it's very difficult now to do agricultural practices in the normal way we have been doing it. But also it will become a challenge for infrastructure such as roads, bridges, and other such infrastructure, where, for example, you might find that because of heavy rainfall intensity that we are expecting in the future, roads might be washed away, and therefore there will be a need for us to incorporate this information into our plans, into our designs, for all the sectors, so that at least there's some form of resilience as we build this our infrastructure.
Okay, perfect. Mr. Sinyangwe, before we take a break, building on what Mr. Nkonde has stated, the future projections in terms of the impact of climate change, how are you working with the farmers to ensure that they probably get to start adapting to these impacts?
Thank you very much. We in the Ministry of Agriculture, we are cognizant of the fact that the temperatures are going up, and of course this poses quite some challenge on our farmers. And therefore, there are two scenarios. First, let me look at the positive side. Increasing temperatures might be seen from a positive sense, in the sense that it will increase the evapotranspiration from the plant, therefore forcing the plant to absorb more nutrients, and therefore stimulating plant growth. But like I indicated earlier on, most of our farmers depend on rain-fed agriculture. In an event that they are not irrigating, then that will cause stress on the crop, which might ultimately lead to crop failure. Again, like Mr. Nkonde mentions, that these temperatures will keep going up. If we do not adapt now, then we have a challenge to deal with in the future. So, as a Ministry of Agriculture, there are several technologies that we are promoting, for example, climate smart agriculture, to try and answer in the short term and longer term the variability that comes with climate change.
Right. Okay. Thank you so much. You are watching Think 2044, and today we are discussing climate resilience practices in agriculture. We'll take a short break. We'll be right back. Stay tuned.
Trees cover 30% of our planet. They play a huge part in absorbing gases such as carbon dioxide, which is turned into oxygen. Thousands of trees are cut down every year for charcoal production, agricultural purposes. Dry, infertile land leading to crop failure, inflation and hunger. All this contributing to the climate change. Climate change is real. Plant a tree, save the earth. Get involved.
Think 2044. Call the 3 hotline 2044 for more information. This advert is brought to you by the Ministry of National Development Planning, Pilot Program for Climate Resilience, PPCR, with support of the World Bank Group and the African Development Bank.
Welcome back. This is the third episode of Think 2044, and today we are discussing climate resilience agricultural practices. And before we went on a break, Mr. Sinyangwe, you did touch on some of the measures that you're putting in place as a ministry to ensure that farmers get to adapt. But going forward, are there any specific programs that you are putting in place in this particular regard?
Yes, there are quite a number. Just to mention a few, we currently got funding under the Green Climate Fund, or to the tune of the $2 million. This is to support small-scale farmers in 3 areas. One, to be able to plan for climate risk. And once they are able to plan for climate risk, then they will engage in production that can withstand climate change. And then you link them to the markets. We have other programs like the Irrigation Development Support Project. We heard from Mr. Kachunga from Mwama here. Water is quite an important input in agriculture. So we are trying to tap from the water bodies and transfer this water to areas where the farmers can use it productively. The other projects include conservation agriculture scaling up, like I alluded to earlier on. We're looking at technologies that do not disturb the soil completely and expose it, and therefore releasing greenhouse gases to the atmosphere, which gases become responsible for trapping the heat when it is emitted back from the Earth's surface. Okay. So therefore, we at the ministry, we are promoting conservation agriculture to try and help farmers cultivate only where they're going to plant. In this $32 million, how many farmers are targeted? 150,000 households are targeted, and that has a multiplier effect of reaching to about almost 1 million farmers. Okay, perfect. Mr. Nkonde, how has climate change affected Zambia, and is there a cause for concern?
Definitely there's cause for concern. Like what I might give as an example of what we are expecting, for example, is what happened again, I alluded to it earlier, in the 2018-2017 season, where we had January, which normally is supposed to be the peak of our rain season, was the lowest in terms of rainfall, you know. And January, because of our agricultural practices, it's supposed to be the highest month with a lot of rainfall. That feeds into, you know, crops such as maize. For them to produce, you know, efficiently and adequately, they need January to have a lot of rainfall. Apart from being part of this platform where you are sending that message to the people out there, are there any platforms that you are using to sensitize the farmers on the effects of climate change as meteorological department? Yes, we are. Probably I can give you the portfolio of products and information that we generate. Before the onset of the rain, we produce what we call the seasonal rainfall forecast, which gives just an outlook of the performance of rainfall over a 3-month period. So we would say October, November, and January, we may receive above average or below average, and that helps the farmers to plan as well. But as we go into the season itself, we start now updating that forecast, because as I've said, it's an amalgamation of 3 months. So as we enter the season, we now start breaking down into smaller periods. So we give what we call, specifically for farmers and water resource managers, we give what we call the crop weather bulletin, which now gives rainfall performance over the next period, but also gives a review of what has happened in the past 10 days. So that information is also targeted for the farmers. We send it to the farmers in different channels. We use TV, we use radio, but also we have an array of community radio stations across the country, which we share this information to, so that they go and repackage that information to disseminate in the local languages and in the local format. So those are some of the channels that we are using. We are trying to use several channels, to develop several channels. For example, we have a website where some of this information can be found and people can access and use. We do work very closely with the DMMU and with the Ministry of Agriculture share this information once we produce it. In fact, for the seasonal rainfall forecast, for example, we don't produce it as the Met Department alone, but we come together and so that we can communicate not only the performance of the rainfall, but also the impacts that may arise from what we are projecting for each sector. So we have people from WAMA, for example, the water sector. We have people from agricultural sector, the energy people, so that we sit down and we tell them to say, this is what we are projecting as the performance of the rainfall. Therefore, what are the impacts for your sectors? So that when we issue that forecast now, it speaks to not only our language as meteorologists, but the impacts, because that's what will move people to act.
Thank you so much. Mr. Kachunga, in ending, what your remarks?
Well, the final remarks to the public or to the community out there is that we should protect our water resources. We should try by all means to conserve our water resources because it is our future.
Mr. Nkonde?
For us, the final remark would be probably to make mention of what the Meteorological Department is trying to do in order to improve, for example, our information, climate information that can be used now for the different sectors to become resilient and to adapt. So what we are doing is to strengthen, for example, our observation infrastructure across the country so that, because the challenge that we have had in the past is we have had very little points where we are observing the weather, and therefore to give meaningful information on how climate is changing becomes a challenge. So we are trying to strengthen that aspect of our observation infrastructure. The second aspect that we are trying to do is to start producing more sector-tailored information for each sector, for the water sector, for agriculture sector, so that we don't give a general climate information, but information that is tailored for each sector, but also tailored for each locations, because the country is so vast and the climate zones are quite different and people are affected differently in the way the climate changes and the way it behaves. So we are trying to do those, to produce location-specific information, but also we're trying to strengthen our communication channels so that we have more platforms to reach all the users of climate information.
Okay, yeah. Perfect. Mr. Shinyangwe, in brief, your concluding remarks.
Thank you. Let me pick it up from where Acting Director Met has left. Firstly, I think for us as a sector, agriculture sector, we need to continue building and enhancing this partnership between the Meteorological Department and us as a user. For agriculture depends on good climate information, which is timely, and that is our prayer. Then we do recognize that climate change is a serious developmental challenge, and as a country we need to adapt. Because if we do not adapt, then we are in trouble.
Well, dear viewer, this is where we come to the end of this week's edition of Think 2044. We have been discussing climate resilient agricultural practices, and three major things have come out from this discussion. The first one, that you need to protect the water resource, and the second one is that you need to conserve the agriculture by practicing conservation agriculture, and the third one is that you need to know your weather. I've been your host, Macpherson Mukuka, and I was joined by Mr. Aaron Kachunga, who is a water engineer from the Water Resources Management Authority, WAMA, and also Mr. Edson Nkonde, who is acting director at the Meteorological Department. Also was Mr. Joyce Sinyango, who is a principal agriculture specialist, land management and conservation farming from the Ministry of Agriculture. Think 2044. Time to act is now. Goodbye and God bless you.
Think 2044.
Do you realize this world won't be the same always?
Think 2044. We have to emphasize that we have to change our way. By 2044, the temperatures will fall, and the flash floods will come, and our crops will start to drown.
But we can save our time.
We can save this place. We go home.
Yes.
We go home. Think 2044. We can think 2044. 2044.